can't get past the memory lock to isolate the chain.
Simple. Just enhance the memory index. Actualize data. Grade 5. Here we go. Execute worm function. Enhance. Redimensionalize variables. Ta-da!
Welcome back to Trash Cannon. I'm here with Adam Clarke.
Hello.
Hello. To talk about Lawnmower Man 2, one of the most hotly anticipated sequels of the 1990s.
Yes, this is part of the Lawnmower Man cinematic universe.
Yeah. And sadly, we never got a third movie, just like with the Death Nurse duology. It never got a we never got a natural conclusion to the saga. So Adam, why don't you start by, because again, this was the guest pick. Why don't you start off by telling me why you wanted to do this movie?
Oh, God. The answers are tenfold. Well, one of the things I do is I've recently started a podcast on Canadian horror movies. I am a big fan of Weird CanCon, and a little bit of Weird CanCon that we have here is star Matt Frewer replacing Jeff Fahey in the role of Lawnmower Man. And even though I believe, because Frewer, I think, was born in Washington, but he was raised in Peterborough and then studied acting in the UK. There's nothing international about him. He sounds like he's from Peterborough. He has the Ontarian accent. He looks like a goober from Hamilton. He's as Canadian as it gets. But like a lot of people, from my age group, I adore bad virtual reality / hacking movies, which was a minor subgenre of the 90s. I adore that this film was originally titled Lawnmower Man 2 Beyond Cyberspace.
Yes.
And one of the things that I found absolutely fascinating, I'm enough of a dork and I guess a fan of Frewer's because I love Max Headroom. I grew up on Max Headroom. I adored the ABC sci-fi series Max Headroom, not to be confused with the talk show, the original Max Talking Headroom show from Showtime, which we did not get in Canada. I was a big fan of that series, and when I saw the credit, I was enough of a complete dork that when I saw the credit directed by Farhad Mann, a light went off in my head, and I realized, wait a minute, he directed the very first episode of the ABC series. He directed the Blipverts episode. So his relationship with Frewer dates all the way back to 1987.
Yeah, and Farhad Mann is also Canadian, isn't he?
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah, I think so. I don't know where, but I in my research I remember seeing that.
We've definitely not tried to reclaim him, probably because unlike Matt Frewer, where we'll insist, it's no, Max Headroom is Canadian. Matt Frewer is a decent character actor who you have to direct to prevent him from going into an embarrassing area. But if you direct him, he could be great. Unlike old Max Headroom, with Farhad Mann, it's what has he directed? The sequel to Two Moon Junction that Matt Frewer is also in. And I had to double check. It's what does a movie like Lawnmower Man 2 Beyond Cyberspace, aka Job's War, which it was retitled on home video when New Line Cinema got embarrassed by the title Beyond Cyberspace? What do you do after that's the last film on your resume? And you can tell this isn't a hugely high budgeted movie, but it's got a decent budget. Yeah, judging by the sets and some of the special effects there, particularly the practical effects. And sure enough, within 2 years, he was directing episodes of Pam Anderson's VIP.
Yeah, and that's a nice segue because I wanted to bring up Farhad Mann. Did the pilot for Max Headroom, which is the by far the most successful project he's done because he got several Emmys for it. Mm-hmm. But he also directed the pilot for Forever Knight.
Yes, he directed Nick Knight.
Yeah.
Which is weird. So that also gives him an odd tie to Canada, because Nick Knight wasn't picked up as is, because it originally starred, I think, Rick Springfield in the title role. It was
Oh
basically a
my
shitty
God.
version of Angel, for listeners who have no idea what Forever Night is. Forever Night was filmed in Canada several years later, and I recall it being a syndicated show, but I think CBS aired it, and it was syndicated here in Canada. But it had an all Canadian cast that had a lot of that guys. So when you think of like Canadian B movies and B movies that are shot in Vancouver, you'll recognize all of the cast. You're like, oh, Lacroix, the bad guy, or the anti-hero. It's like, that's poor man's Malcolm McDowell, who's in every Canadian horror movie.
Well, I think you, me, and Allison Pagler, better known as Obscure Slooper, are the only three people who ever watched it.
That is absolutely. I've got one other person that I know of who watched it, and yeah, you're not far off. Somehow that was enough to get this CanCon co-production to limp along for 3 seasons.
Oh wow, yes. And he also directed a TV adaptation of Dean Koontz's The Face of Fear. So Dean Koontz and Farhad Mann, the perfect team up. And also, and I honestly didn't know this. The Michael Mann wrote this. I mean, Farhad Mann wrote the
I was about to
screenplay.
say.
Yeah, he wrote the screenplay, but the story concept he co-wrote with Michael Miner, the screenplay writer for RoboCop, who has done only this and the co-writing the story concept for Lawnmower Man 2, uh, which is an interesting career, and I think he ended up just directing documentaries from since then. So, yeah, Lawnmower Man 2 probably killed his career, kind of. Um, Matt Frewer, yeah, he's done a lot of work, and he actually is a genuinely good actor when he has good direction, like you said. But the one standout is that Matt Frewer actually voiced Sid the Squid from one of my favorite Batman the Animated Series episodes.
Oh wow! I don't. Which one is that?
It's the one where where this sort of loser criminal accidentally kills Batman, or so he thinks, and like the entire underworld
Oh,
is after him.
Right.
Yeah,
He's great in
yeah,
that. Yeah.
yeah. And the Joker wants to kill him, and all these gangsters want to kill him because like killing Batman turns him into a martyr and makes him more dangerous in a way. And it's like it's kind of a brilliant episode because it kind of explains why Batman is able to do what he does, because nobody really wants Batman to die. And it's just like sort of this spotlight episode on this criminal and on this loser criminal, and how Batman just sort of like takes Sid to jail, but at the same time he lets Sid get like some recognition. So it's a great illustration of Batman's compassion. It's just like a really clever episode, and Matt Frewer does a great job voicing it. And I honestly wouldn't have known because it doesn't sound like him.
Because he doesn't have a digital stutter.
Yeah, exactly.
And he's not hawking new Coke.
Yeah, and he's not imitating a fourth-rate Jim Carrey.
Well, that's
like
you raise an interesting point there, because there's a great. Did you ever see? Because of course this is all tied. So, Farhad Mann directed the first episode of the American Max Headroom show, but the pilot was technically done in England by Rocky Jensen or Rocky Morton and Annabelle Jensen, or whatever their names were, Rocky and Annabelle. They directed the pilot, which was called Max Headroom: The Original Story, and it's essentially the same plot. And so Max Headroom comes from Channel 4. And when Channel 4 was switching to a digital signal in the mid-2000s, they got Matt Frewer to play an elderly Max Headroom complaining about how things are digital these days. And they're a great series of ads, but they're clearly just filming, as is always the case, they're filming Matt Frewer ad-libbing. And The crusty old Max Headroom says, "First Jim Carrey steals my shtick, now this."
Oh, okay. So I might have been a little unfair there. Huh?
Well, it's like, you know what? There's a real similarity to how the two of them acted. I don't know. I don't know if you'd call the 3 years that Max Headroom was a really big deal as Jim Carrey levels of fame, but
Yeah.
he had his highlights and then has had a fairly steady career as a character actor. But you see Jim Carrey's performances, and they're so similar to what he was doing as Max Headroom and in a lot of his more ad-libby, show-offy, scenery-chewing kind of roles. And you can't help but think it must have really burned Frewer when he had to voice Jim Carrey's character on the Dumb and Dumber cartoon.
Oh my God.
Like, that is the most humiliating Saturday morning cartoon casting since Ernie Hudson was denied the role of Winston Zeddemore on The Real Ghostbusters.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. I apologize to Matt Frewer. Wow. You were the Oreo to the crap. I was about to make a really clever reference, and now I can't remember the name of the cookie. The or Hydrox. Yes.
Oh.
So Matt Frewer is Hydrox cookies, and Jim Carrey is Oreo. Wow. Um, and we also have starring Austin O'Brien, the only cast member from the original Lawnmower Man to show up in this movie. He's probably only known for being in Last Action Hero, and he hasn't been in acting since 2015. Which also brings me to the fact that all the people who play the kids in this movie, none of them except Austin O'Brien, had a career that lasted past 2005. Whereas all the adult actors, or at least all the major ones, are still acting.
Mm.
But or for the most part have had pretty undistinguished careers. Oh, and one last bit of trivia. Molly Shannon, of all people,
Yes.
has a cameo.
What's weird is that she's in this and Return to Two Moon Junction. I think she's playing a homeless lady in both, but yeah, she's like a crazy cat lady in this, which is kind of perfect. If you're going to use Molly Shannon, that's the role she was born to play.
I know, I hate to admit this, but I actually when I found it out, I actually had to get the movie up and running again and scan through for her appearance because I totally missed it the first time.
Well, yeah, it's one of those things like it's like seeing Samuel L. Jackson in The Exorcist 3. You won't realize it's him unless you're told.
And that's exactly what happened. Because she's only in there for like 10 seconds, right?
She's only a wide shot. It's her voice. They don't dub her over like poor old Sam Jackson in Exorcist 3, where, he sounds about as black as me in that film. But with Molly Shannon, it's like I had to rewind it because she's credited, and it's like you wouldn't normally credit a person for a role like that. She's like in the background of a wide shot screaming as subway trains are going by. Like it's insignificant,
Yeah.
but she gets a credit because I think Farhad Man just had a thing for putting Molly Shannon in extremely small roles. He was the Una O'Connor of Farhad Man films.
Yes, his extensive. Yeah, I should have checked to see if she shows up in the Dean Koontz adaptation. That would be perfect.
Oh man, if she's in one of those VIP episodes he did, that's the picture.
But okay, before and I know I'm kind of putting off talking about the actual movie
And why would you?
Why would I? But I generally do feel like you can't talk about Lawnmower Man 2 without talking about Lawnmower Man 1. And to be honest, it's a movie. This was my first time watching Lawnmower Man 2, which I think I was a Lawnmower Man 2 virgin, and just like the time I lost my actual virginity, it was a humiliating and painful experience. But I've seen the original one. Yeah, blood. No comment. The first Lawnmower Man is the movie I watched. I think I watched it when I was a kid when it first came out on home video, and I watched it a couple more times since then. And honestly, like I wouldn't call it a good movie
No,
or
nor should you.
yeah, but honestly, like as far as movies that are basically let's do flowers for Algernon, except the guy gets superpowers and kills people. I think it's almost as good as you could expect that concept to be, um, because Jeff Faherty, I could never say his name. It's like I want to add a syllable to it. Jeff Faherty, or whatever. He like his performance of Job as mentally disabled is kind of cringy, but like he doesn't do a bad job of Job as sort of a more once he becomes intelligent and psychopathic. But I mean, at least it kind of does go into the themes of whether or not Job getting intelligence is what turns him into a psychopath, or if there's some justification to the murderous rampage he engages in against people who exploited him, and if whether or not God, I'm blanking on the name of the actor.
Oh, Pierce Brosnan, who played the Doctor, who
Yeah,
gives
yeah,
him super
Pierce.
smarts.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's why my train of thought crashed because I couldn't remember his name and I was too embarrassed to ask. Pierce Bronson's whether
Charles Bronson and Pierce Brosnan's illegitimate son.
yeah whether or not Pierce Bronson's whether or not Pierce Bronson just how morally dubious his own exploitation of Job is. Like it doesn't explore those scenes well, but I mean at least they're there, you know. And honestly, and the other interesting thing about Lawnmower Man 1 is that it's actually a movie that becomes less interesting and morally ambiguous if you watch the director's cut, because the theatrical cut takes out a scene where Job kills Pierce Bronson's wife for literally no reason.
Oh, okay.
Which completely ruins like the whole arc for both characters and their relationship. So this is actually one movie where I would recommend watching the theatrical cut if you haven't seen it yet.
Yes, and funny watching that's interesting. I first watched Lawnmower Man a long, long time ago, and it's a rare movie that even as a child I couldn't finish. Like my dad rented it for us to watch because we'd each pick out a horror movie to watch that weekend, and I picked, I don't know, Pumpkinhead 2 Blood Wings or something.
Starring Bill Clinton's brother.
Yes, he's in it. Soleil Moon Frye is in it. Linnea Quigley is in it briefly. And Andrew Robinson's in it. So star-studded, plus Pumpkinhead. And my dad rented Lawnmower Man. And I think, like most people, he got conned by the based on Stephen King advertisements. Because it was, I think, the second wave of VHS releases, not even the theatrical release, but the second wave of VHSs, where they had to remove that because King sued. And, Lawnmower Man, the movie, has about as much in common with Lawnmower Man, the short story, as Lawnmower Man 2 really has in common with Lawnmower Man. They're different pieces. But it's the rare movie where I was, like, so disinterested I left, which is a shame because watching the original Lawnmower Man, the last half hour is much better than everything preceding it, even though I would much rather watch a schlock movie than an attempt at being thoughtful that fails. And the minute that Jeff Fahey turns into an evil super genius who takes his girlfriend to cyberspace, turns into a frog, and then jizzes on her until she becomes mentally handicapped, it's one of the best scenes in the movie. And it has a legitimately creepy ending that this movie ignores, which is that Job's physical body totally decays because he jumps into cyberspace, and he pays off a threat that's mentioned in dialogue earlier in the movie. It's like, I've become one with all electrical signals or whatever when you hear every phone in the world ringing at the same time. And that's how Lawnmower Man ends. It ends with Pierce Brosnan's phone starts to ring and everyone kind of freezes, and then you hear a bunch of phones ringing in the distance, and it's actually like a nice ending for a just trash movie.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I would still say that the movie probably has a worse reputation than it otherwise would have because of the whole Stephen King connection. And for those among my six listeners who don't know, um, they literally did take the script for an unrelated movie, which I think was called Cyber God or something like
Yeah.
that originally, and they just slapped on the title of a Stephen King story. Um, which had nothing to do with it because it was like just a short story about a man who hires a lawnmower man, and it turns out to be a satyr from Greek mythology or something. And the satyr, and like he has to agree not to tell anybody, but he calls a friend of his or his wife or something. It's been ages since I read the story, but he tells somebody breaking the rules, and the satyr comes in and kills him. And they basically took the scene where the satyr kills the man, plopped it into the movie where Job kills his kid friend Peter's abusive dad, and that's like literally the only connection besides the title that the movie has to the story. And it got so bad, and this really shows just how shady and determined New Line Cinema was. They actually, after the lawsuit, they actually still marketed the movie in Los Angeles and I think a couple of other major cities as Stephen King's Lawnmower Man.
Oh.
And the judge had to fine them. They had to pay like Stephen King, I think, $10,000 a day until they removed the advertising or something ridiculous like that. So they literally violated a court order just to keep marketing it as Stephen King's Lawnmower Man. And the funny thing is like Stephen King actually liked the movie, unlike he didn't like The Shining, but he liked Lawnmower Man. But he still sued out of principle. So
Well, that's I'm glad that he did that. Although that's like perfectly in keeping with Stephen King, based on what he seems to like, because he has kind of trashed the better adaptations of his material, like The Shining or John Carpenter's Christine, which, while it totally misses the haunted house element or haunted car element of that story or that novel, it's still very well made and stylish, and more so than your average, crappy Stephen King tie-in. But he seems to like Pet Cemetery and Cujo, which are just awful. So I'll never.
and the Shining TV miniseries.
Yeah, he praises Mick Garris, and like Mick Garris has made exactly one good movie. It's called Critters 2: The Main Course.
I definitely agree there.
Yeah.
So I think I might have liked Lawnmower Man 1 a smidge more than you at least, but I don't really dispute anything you have to say, and I think we both agree that Lawnmower 2 makes Lawnmower Man 1 look like a cinematic masterpiece by comparison.
Well, I guess going back to what I was saying earlier is that I really enjoy trash. I really enjoy just when a movie totally shits the bed. And so,
Yeah.
while there are no jizz frogs, sadly, in Lawnmower Man 2, he doesn't seduce the kindly doctor who seems to have an interest in Job, despite the fact that he has no legs. He's like, no, please climb on me with your stump legs. At least you still have your cock. That's the subtext of that scene where she opens a Twinkie for him. And despite the fact that there's no jizzing frogs in cyberspace, this movie is so bad that I was kind of hypnotized by it. I was so kept by how like silly and nonsensical it was, and it completely turns into almost a gibberish movie where characters are just saying Egypt to each other, and it kind of turns into Overdrawn at the Memory Bank at the end.
Yeah, that was the amazing thing. Was like literally nothing about the story's plot made sense.
No.
Starting with the fact that okay, so we have Well, first off, they explained that they actually went out of the way to explain that um, when they recovered Job's body from the exploding laboratory in the last movie, um, that they had to give him facial reconstruction surgery, and that's why he looks like Matt Frewer now.
Yeah, that's the RoboCop 3 excuse. Where they have RoboCop getting hit by a flamethrower, and they perform surgery on his face in a totally unnecessary scene because, one, when someone's in that suit with their face stretched back, they kind of look like RoboCop anyway. But the makeup team gave that new actor prosthetics where he looked like Peter Weller anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, that leads to, I guess, my favorite part of this recasting, which is when Peter sees Job later on in cyberspace. He identifies himself by showing him a magic lawnmower for a couple of seconds. And it's like, wait a minute, you're Job. And it's like, wait a minute. Jeff Fahey in overalls is who you know. Why would you recognize Matt Frewer in the same outfit that Elvis wore on his 50,000 Elvis Fans Can't Be Wrong album cover?
Oh god, the outfit. Yeah, Job goes around in like a gold bodysuit. Jim encrusted too, if I remember right. I think my brain deleted the image or tried to, but it's Jim encrusted, isn't it?
It's got it's kind of confusing. So in certain scenes, it appears to be a series of lights flickering on and off, like he is a human light bright. I guess to signify how digital he is. But in that sequence where, and this is why all your listeners need to rent Lawnmower Man 2 Beyond Cyberspace, when Austin O'Brien falls off of his Tron bike and a stone gargoyle turns into Matt Frewer.
Yes!
There is a little, you know how in toothpaste commercials, they'll add a little white flash on someone's teeth, a cartoon flash? It's the same flash as when Q appears on the TNG bridge. They'll add that to show it's like, you're shining in white. His outfit shines. They added an animated ding when he first shows up. And that's why I like this movie way more than Lawnmower Man. It's little touches like that where it's like, oh, this film is completely out to lunch, and it seems like everyone except for the child cast and maybe a couple of the adults knew they were making schlock. Like, Matt Frewer knows he isn't a piece of crap. I would definitely say that at least one of the villains, at least the villainous corporate Walker, who we'll talk about later, definitely knows he's in a piece of crap.
Yeah. I just kind of wish that Matt Frewer went all Jeremy Irons and Highlander 2 with it.
Well, you know, that the amazing thing is Matt Frewer, because he is ad-libbing, is just throwing out weird jokes, and they don't really match the dialogue that he's being fed. Like, the scenes don't quite match. Like, he goes on a little riff about incest that makes no sense, but it's just there because Matt Frewer is throwing out one-liners and seeing which sticks. And as a result, you get a sense of what Farhad Man's conception of Job is in this version of the movie, which is just evil Max Headroom. He even shows up on TVs at the end of the film preaching to a mass of people to log in. And the thing that I found super weird is that the devices you use to go on the internet, and it's only said once, super late in the movie, where the president is going to be going into cyberspace for the first time, because it's that kind of movie. The evil Walker informs him, it's like, all right, Mr. President, don your iPhone and we will be in cyberspace. And he's like, they call them iPhones? But
yeah, I caught that.
Yeah, but an iPhone is just putting on a pair of headphones, except you're leaning the headband back so it touches your forehead. And then you put on the sunglasses from like those weird Wheeler-esque villains from Highlander 2. And then you're in the computer world. But they call it an iPhone. It's like, wow, that's like the one part of Lawnmower Man 2 that was prescient.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have the digital phone booths where you can play games and video chat with people.
Oh, and I love
Sadly.
when a mustachioed man named Guillermo tries to put a stop to Job when he figures out that Job is killing people using his computer powers. And he, Job enters into a cybernetic file folder where he's flipping through like digital folders. He's actually just throwing around these animated folders, and it looks just like that scene. Do you remember the reverse sexual harassment film Disclosure?
Yes.
And there's a scene in which Michael Douglas, to prove the fact that he's being sexually harassed by Demi Moore and not the other way around, which he claims, he has to like go into virtual reality and get the files which prove his innocence. It's just like that.
I know that it'd be such a pain in the ass. I mean, it's bad enough that Microsoft that Windows needs to update like every 4 hours, and I get ads for shit just for opening Excel. But yeah. I mean, it's like every time I need to open up a Microsoft Word document, I need to like, put on my VR headset, walk into a corridor, and just be like, all right, where's my /fic of Lady Death and Thanos? Here it is. Okay. But yeah, we should go into the world building. So like in the five, and they explicitly, I didn't think they were going to do it, because Peter in the original Lawnmower Man is like around 10 years old, and he's a teenager in this movie, and they just say the future.
Yes, the title card reads Los Angeles, the future.
Yeah, and so I thought they were going to try to leave it vague, even though since they have the original actor, you can just do the math on his age.
Yeah.
But they actually have Joe drop a line of dialogue where he talks about like it's been 5 years since his body was recovered, and like in the 5 years since, they have the VR toll booths, phone booths. They have the futuristic cars. They have open flames everywhere, and LA just looks like the typical Blade Runner dystopia that every single '90s movie, down to Super Mario Brothers the movie, had.
Yes. There's some eerie similarities between that movie and this one, which, oddly enough, that was directed by the people who directed the British Max Headroom pilot.
Interesting.
Yeah, that was their last big shot at like a feature film, because they had directed the DOA remake to mixed reviews, but people at least admitted it was stylish. And then they were in charge of the Mario Brothers movie, and by all accounts are responsible for everything that's bad about the Mario Brothers movie.
See, there's all these ties. Maybe all these Blade Runner inspired '90s movies take place in the same universe.
It's a strange thing, because like I remember, did you ever see, not to get totally off track, but did you ever see the unaired pilot for a TV series based on Sam Raimi's Darkman?
I did, yes.
It's terrible. It's so bad. Like, if you thought the direct-to-video sequels, one of which stars Jeff Fahey as the villain, in the immortally titled Die Darkman Die, if you thought those were bad, they are huge improvements, huge steps up on the unbelievable ineptitude in which Darkman, played by yet another actor who is again playing an American character but is not American and is faking an accent badly. It's supposed to be set in the present day, but all the exterior shots are clipped from Blade Runner, including the famous shot of the Coca-Cola commercial with the geisha and everything played on that huge screen.
Wow.
So I don't know, something was in the air for about 10 years or 15 years after Blade Runner came out, because even if it didn't make sense, people would want to imitate it. Because like, I can understand if you're trying to show the present day, or the future as it is here, being influenced by certain advances in virtual reality and electronics that are only in this movie's universe. That's totally fine. But the fact that we've gone from like 1992 to at most 1998, going from the suburbs to Decker hunting replicants. Or it almost looks like the Mars Mall in the original Total Recall. Like it's totally out of place, and everyone has like super bikes and weird, like all the cars look like VW Bugs, except they have dryer tubes on them.
And half of LA subway system has been abandoned and has precocious waifs, including Peter,
Yes.
living in them.
Yes, because Peter and his Baker Street irregulars they're all living in this abandoned subway car, which again gave me flashbacks because that's where Arnold Vosloo lived in Darkman's 2 and 3. But weirdly, like the most distracting thing is the kids' fashion, which is not attempting to look futuristic, but they're all inexplicably dressed like Blossom.
Yes! Oh, yeah, I actually made a note of that in my notes. It was like, this is supposed to be the future, but their clothes are like 3 years out of date by the time the movie comes out.
Yeah, they're all wearing kicky berets for some reason. Like every time you have a close-up on Peter or his love interest, I guess they kiss once at the very beginning of the movie, and it's kind of forgotten about.
Yeah.
I keep expecting to hear like, "In my opinionation, the sun is going to surely shine."
Yes.
Terrible. Like the costume
Braves.
designs in this movie alone make me like it more than Lawnmower Man, because that was like an attempt at a real movie that just goes off the rails and has like one very goofy scene and one chilling and effective scene at the end. But this is all terrible all the time. I'm entertained by every single mistake they made.
Yeah, the berets and the pastels, and contrasted with the hero Dr. Trace, who is totally a write-in for Pierce Bronson because he said, no fucking way I'm doing this movie.
And what's worse is that he's played by Patrick Bergin, who no one has seen in anything. And when you see him on screen, he really makes you appreciate the charisma and screen presence of David Hasselhoff.
Well, to be fair, I would classify him as that guy. He's like that guy that you vaguely recognize if you're watching like a British TV show. It's like, hey, I've seen him in other stuff. I don't know what, but
Yeah, he was in the 90s Robin Hood that wasn't Robin Hood Prince of Thieves or Robin Hood Men in Tights.
yeah, I went to his IMDb page and it was like half British stuff that I vaguely remember seeing at some point, and half British stuff I never heard of. So I guess I don't know. I couldn't find anything biographical, but I guess like he thought Lawnmower Man 2 would be his big break across the Atlantic. And
The only thing I'll say, because like I think that his performance is diabolically bland.
Yeah.
But I will say this. The one bit of praise I can give him is that Bergen does a really convincing accent. Like, I didn't know he was Irish.
Yeah, he does do a good American accent.
Yeah, because compare it to a much better performance but a much worse accent, which is Liam Neeson in the original Dark Man, where he's like, Julie, tell me about the Belisarius memorandum. Like, it's amazing. It's amazing. No one uses R's like Europeans trying to sound like North Americans. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
they sound
exactly.
fucking terrible. Like, if you ever saw the British-made Road to Avonlea with Anthony Ainley, the 80s master from Doctor Who, as like an American gentleman, it's the fucking best.
Holy
Hello,
crap.
how are you?
I need that movie in my life. But yeah, I was gonna say the costuming for Dr. Trace is and I love that name too, Dr. Trace. It's like so pretentious. You know, he dresses like he's basically a giant brochure for cultural insensitivity of white people imitating Native American dress.
Yes, and he's got dreadlocks too. He's got white
Yeah,
boy
he has
dreadlocks.
dreadlocks. Yeah, he's got the dreadlocks, the vaguely Native American outfit and everything. It was fantastic.
Now tell me if you think I'm right here. The first time I saw him, I thought he looks like a university professor who is between sexual harassment complaints.
I think that sums it up perfectly. I think that was actually in the screenplay.
Well, that's the weird thing because like I thought of that when I first saw him, and then later on it's established that he and what is her name? I'm trying to think.
Corey.
Corey, yes.
Yeah.
Corey was his student, and they had a romance while they were teacher and student. It's implied.
Oh yeah, I didn't catch that. Yeah, and the only reason she's mad at him is because he. Wait. Crap. Trying to remember this movie's plot is like trying to remember what happened when you got blackout drunk once. Yeah, because Trace invented the Chiron ship.
Yes, and that's the MacGuffin for the movie. It's a triangle that will unleash unlimited power on the internet. Consequences will never be the same.
Yeah, that's really where the movie just sort of stops trying to make sense because it's like it makes it because they just like throw. It's not even really technobabble. It's just like concepts that don't make any sense because it's like, well, it'll be the first time that there's a network inside virtual reality and it will make virtual reality a physical space, and it's just like what and it's like even by the 90s I don't think that would have made any sense to anybody.
No, and like Job. Okay, so Job essentially at the beginning of the film has reverted back to being mentally handicapped. And then using, lock-on technology of the Sega 32X, they're able to bring him up to speed, and he becomes a super genius again. And, of course, we continue with the Lawnmower Man's insulting insinuation that the more intelligent you get, the more you become an evil super genius.
Right.
And so he can apparently, or so he claims, he can live without food and he has a better existence online. And I guess his grand scheme is to take over all of the internet with the Chiron chip. And he wants to amass all of humanity as his followers to come live with him in cyberspace, where he will be celebrated as Jesus, I guess. And he will be the emperor of all of the world. He will be the mayor of Second Life. And that's his whole plan. And honestly, the only reason that there's like a Chiron chip and Job is asking, Trace, its inventor, what is Egypt, which is this code that is preventing him from fully accessing all of the Chiron chip's powers. Because like Dr. Serizawa from the original Godzilla, Trace fears the potential destructive force of unlimited internet. It's basically the oxygen destroyer, but with broadband internet. And he refuses to give Job the Egypt protocol or whatever the hell it is. And Job apparently works his way around that. And he's like, I'm still able to access all the programs. But it turns out that Egypt functions as a dam preventing information from getting in. So when Job eventually merges with the Triforce that is the Chiron chip, it's just a big triangle. His virtual reality setup explodes and he becomes mentally handicapped again.
Yeah, it becomes good again. Yeah, we should go into. Oh yeah, first, so the Chiron chip looks like a mystical artifact from a crappy video game of the time.
Yes, and in the climax of the film, Matt Frewer and Patrick Bergin have a sword fight that plays like a fan film based on The Phantom Menace.
It does.
And what's great is that it's great seeing Matt Frewer's 40-year-old mom butt in his gold lame outfit as he's trying to duke it out with a guy who looks like David Hasselhoff's stunt double, using effects that would not be out of place as a background in an episode of Reboot.
No, or from original PlayStation cutscenes.
Yep, or VR5. Name your dated CGI thing and it's here.
Yeah, yeah, that's another thing. Like Lawnmower Man 1, I mean, as dated as the Cyber Job graphics were, at least they were more distinctive than anything you get out of this movie. Like, because I was thinking of all the scenes where Job is like going on his Messiah trip in virtual reality, and all these people are, quote, jacking on, unquote. So sad that that never became the slang for logging on.
Yes, unfortunately, and it's weird. I think they only call it jacking on so that Matt Furrer can ad lib jacking on, jacking off. What's the difference? It's like that is only there to set up that lame joke. Like it's just embarrassing. Well, I will say this. Like here's the crazy thing. So like Lawnmower Man's original effects for the CGI Jeff Fahey, like it's ugly. It's really, really ugly. But for the time, it was really advanced. And so
Yeah.
even though he looks like the baby from Pixar's Toy Trumpet back in 1988, it was still like more CGI than you're used to seeing on screen. And all anybody knew really was the T-1000 and a few effect shots from The Abyss. So people were excited about seeing like a CGI movie. And here, CGI has become a bit more advanced, that they were starting to get incorporated into larger releases with varying degrees of success. But you just have Matt Frewer blue screened in to backgrounds that at best look like a shot from Babylon 5.
Yeah, yeah, and I was going to say, like, whenever they showed the crowd shots of all the people, they just look like they're writhing around weirdly.
Yeah.
And I think it's supposed to signify that they're all looking up at Job like a god, and like, they're shielding their eyes, but instead it just looks like they're, like, just this mass of bodies that's wriggling around like worms, and it's really, like, I think it's supposed to be, like, creepy, but it's just goofy looking.
Well, that's the weird thing. So once again, tying this back to Max Headroom, which this is clearly trying to play off of, though they've gone from an R rating to a PG-13. So if you're looking for like a young audience of 13 and under to see this film, how many of them have fond memories of Max Headroom in 1995 or 6? I don't know. But
Yeah.
because they're not all me. But the thing that's so weird about that scene where Frewer is preaching to his flock in there's a couple of odd things. One, it is eerily reminiscent of the Ridley Scott directed New Coke ad, in which a bunch of young cokeologists, as he calls them, meet underground and worship Max Headroom on a TV, and he chastises them for saying the P word when they all say Coke is better than Pepsi. And it's so much like that ad. But the worst thing is when Job is going on his monologue about how in his new world you won't be hungry, there won't be any famine, and you'll be free from temptation. What does he think the internet is used for? Like when people started beaming in, because they fill up theater seats later in the movie when they all start jacking in with their sunglasses and iPhones, they should have all had like their creepy cyber personas. Like there should have been a bunch of diaper furs and like people who enjoy ball busting and like people with foot fetishes, like all in there, and daddy dom subs and all this shit.
Yeah, I didn't get that. I assumed that he meant that like there'd be no temptation because you would get whatever you wanted. I don't know.
Oh, so we're all frogs jizzing on our girlfriends.
Yeah,
in
exactly.
cyberspace.
But I have to say though that, as a millennial who actually is living in a dystopian future, I would probably sign on to Job's pitch. Even if like Matt Frewer just shows up on my screen and just like crazily rants to me and like how I need to upload my consciousness to the internet, and I'll be like, better than here,
Yeah, maybe it's just the Peterborough accent I'm hearing off of Frewer, but I got weird Jordan Peterson vibes from him throughout.
Oh, yeah, that would be a problem.
He's like,
But
these
yeah,
are my 12 rules.
Huh? You need to only eat meat because apple cider will make you have hallucinations. By the way, folks, that's not a joke. That's literally what Jordan Peterson is saying right now.
And remember, what does Job have with him at all times as a potential defense weapon? A sword, just like Jordan Peterson.
Yeah, when you put it that way, maybe not. But if they ever update this movie and give it a re-release, because of course that would ever happen, they should definitely base Job off Jordan Peterson. That would be awesome. I would watch the hell out of that. But yeah, we should get to the movie's other villain, Matthew Waller, who is the CEO who apparently employs Corey, but like somehow took the patent for Trace's Chiron chip, and like I don't know if the movie ever explicitly explains it. I honestly can't remember, but like Trace basically invented virtual reality, and Waller's corporation took it over or something.
Yeah, so you have Jonathan Walker, who owns the patent for the Chiron chip and all of Dr. Trace's work in virtual reality. And for some reason, we that means that, you know, he completely owns the rights to it, and the courts side with him. Kevin Conway, along with Matt Frewer, is the other fun performance in this movie. I think much like a certain set of people will recognize Matt Frewer primarily from that episode of TNG where he played a con man who was pretending he was a future historian just to steal stuff.
Yeah.
Kevin Conway has a great role where he plays the clone of the Klingon mythical warrior Kales. And
I remember.
yeah, he's a super fun ham, and he's exactly like that here. If any of your listeners can't picture Kevin Conway, then just imagine this. What if Ron Silver hit the craft services table a few too many times? There you go. And he's essentially a Republican supervillain because he wants to use his Facebook-like creation. Because his whole plan is he wants to create a network or whatever called virtual light. And he's really using it to get dirt on Democrats.
Yeah, and he even refers to the guy who was going to help fund the project, Senator Mr. Lippman from Seinfeld.
That's right, yes.
He calls him a dirty liberal or liberal scum or something like that.
Yeah, he goes full Rush Limbaugh for a moment.
Yeah, but I mean, if you think that Lawnmower Man 2 has a subtle political message, it really doesn't. Just, you know, the villains are a CEO and a Republican, and that's pretty much it. They don't really go anywhere with it.
And yet all the pieces are there. All the pieces are there to make like a relevant movie for now. I don't know how relevant it would have been for 1996, but it's weird. It's like, no. Matt Frewer is basically playing, a more evil Jordan Peterson, a more evil Sargon of Akkad that a bunch of doofuses are looking up to, while the economy is falling to pieces and Los Angeles is in ruins. And meanwhile, there's an evil Republican conspiracy to try to dig up dirt on Democrats. And he's such an idiot, Walker is, that he's like, how many Democrats are making more than $300,000 a year? And it's like, do you really think that exposing like the disparity in pay is going to like throw people off? It's like, oh, I didn't realize that people in government made a lot of money, more than me. It's like, yeah, that's why people get into it. No one gets into it to make a difference, you dum-dum.
Yeah. Damn liberals with their it's like all the people who criticize Bernie Sanders for owning 2 houses.
Yes, and that's exactly what that conspiracy is. It's like, you're not going to believe that he or she, whatever senator they're talking about, is well paid. It's like, yeah, That's it. That's all they got. Like, I would totally understand. It's like find out about all their, because like again, you'd think about how the internet is actually used. You would try to hack into what's on their hard drive and be like, this is the creepy shit that they're into. Because what's way more embarrassing than someone walking in on you masturbating is someone walking in on what you're masturbating to.
Yes. Yeah, they don't. Aside from several of Job's lines being sex jokes, they don't really delve in at all to like people using VR for creepy sex things.
In the movie that is a sequel to a film that has a jizz frog scene.
Yes. Because like the Ragamuffins, Peter's Ragamuffins, which is a name I really like and would like to see as a band name. Like they don't use virtual reality for anything except like running around in the woods, I guess.
Yeah, it's weird because they're all teenagers, but they're scripted like children. And
they even have like a cute dog.
Yes,
cute dog companion.
In the most embarrassing scene in the movie, the dog Harvey is instructed by the kids while they're in cyberspace, like a $5 Matrix. Put in the disc so they can get their cyber bikes. And the dog is trained enough that it can put a disc in its mouth and set it down, but that's not enough to push a disc into a CD-ROM drive. So they have a dog paw puppet push it in an insert shot. Just embarrassing.
It's fantastic, and it sets the tone for the movie so perfectly. Yeah, so Walker sets up Job, and of course Job is I think we forgot to mention that Job is his legs are have to be amputated, because even though his physical body clearly died in the last movie, they retcon the ending completely and just have it be that his body got badly burned.
Yes. Yeah, they had to amputate, and I guess Walker is allegedly holding him under his thumb with the promise of prosthetic legs. But that doesn't really get addressed in the movie, and Frewer as Job doesn't seem to care.
Yeah, that was the other funny thing is like there's actually an argument between Walker and Corey about like Job's legs, and she says you could have gotten him prosthetic legs, and Walker just says, well, we can't have him walking out of here, and it's just like so I mean it's like the 5 years in the future, such a dystopian hell that you can just go out and grab someone in a wheelchair and take them into your house, and you basically enslave them because they have if they can't leave your house, they have no legal rights.
It's like, joke's on you, Job. This is not wheelchair accessible.
It's just so goofy. I mean that. They would have been better off just not addressing it.
Yeah, because you could delete that line and you wouldn't think, really, like you wouldn't think much of the fact that it's like, well, he's in their employ, and in exchange for room and board, he gets to work on their experiment, and they're not even thinking about creating robot legs for him or any kind of prosthetic. And much though I would have loved to have seen robot legs become a part of the plot, but it was totally unnecessary, and it just adds this, I suppose it's supposed to be additional evil shade for Walker, but you didn't need it. He's the sneering Republican. Like he's already evil enough. He blows up Mr. Lippman, for God's sakes.
No. It was Job. Yeah,
that's Job. But he did want Lippman dead.
Yeah. It was kind of a Henry II, and will no one rid me of this meddling, liberal, vaguely Jewish senator? Job basically kills. He gets quite the body count. He kills. So first he tries to smash a train into where Peter and Dr. Trace is after Dr. Trace refuses to help him, and he kills like this innocent subway worker. Then he kills everybody on the plane with Senator Mr. Lippman from Seinfeld by causing the plane to crash. And then he like gets this poor helicopter pilot to crash into Dr. Trace's house. So we get two basically identical action scenes where they're dodging an exploding fireball, which of course doesn't fit with real life physics at all.
No.
Especially because dodging the exploding subway tunnel, the whole scene where the kid with the dog is like, I can't leave the dog behind, and the subway tunnels are blowing up everywhere else, and giving Dr. Trace enough time to go down and pick up the dog, which the kid couldn't do for some reason. I don't know. He doesn't know you could just hold the dog differently and still climb out of the subway tunnel. So there's enough time for that whole switch and climbing out and taking the dog in another arm to get away from the fire consuming the entire tunnel. And they do the same with the helicopter wreckage. We just have to duck a little bit, and the flames won't touch us miraculously. But yeah, it's basically the same action scene, just copy and pasted with a few details changed, and that's it.
I can only assume those are there because, unlike the CGI effects, the miniature work here is really good.
Yeah. And the explosions are kind of cool. So I guess they just had to spend the budget on something. But I mean, that's the thing. It's okay, the first Lawnmower Man, I mean, obviously had problems, but it really did raise a question of whether or not just how truly evil Job is, because he kills people, but only in the theatrical cut. He only kills people who genuinely exploited him and made his life hell. And in the end, he basically is willing to sacrifice himself to save Peter. Well, not sacrifice himself, but endanger his life because Peter's in danger.
Right.
In this movie, it seems like it's setting up because when they revive Job, his first thoughts are of Peter and his friendship with Peter. But then Job, once he gains intelligence, he sadistically is willing to kill Peter with the subway tunnel. And they go through a lot of trouble showing Job's victims. I mean, they show the subway worker, the pilot, the crew of the airplane that the senator is on. They're showing them suffering and panicking and in very... I wouldn't say gruesome detail, but in pretty explicit, detail that makes Job as unsympathetic as possible, and Job is laughing as he's condemning these innocent people to die. And in the end, when Job is defeated and reverts to his original intelligence, it's oh, he's back into normal, he's good again. And there's nothing, Trace is the one who confronts Job, and Peter has very little to do with the final confrontation, and all the stuff about, the fact that Job was basically willing to murder Peter, not even murder Peter, but just make him collateral damage. That is just he's dumb again, so it's okay.
Well, that's the weird. Is it just me, or is it weirdly more insensitive that they don't use? In the 1990s, they wouldn't have said mentally handicapped, but they wouldn't have used it as a pejorative thing either. Right. That's just how it was. But does it seem weirdly more insensitive that they always refer to Job as he used to be a simpleton? Isn't that weirdly more off-putting and not correct? I don't know, but. What's odd is that this movie shows, because you're absolutely right, in Lawnmower Man, at least the theatrical cut that I know, because when I finally saw it later, that's what I watched. It really is just Jeff Fahey getting revenge on those who mistreated. So he uses his resources and his increased intelligence to decide what's fair fate for those characters, and fair enough. But with this, intelligence turns Job into a supervillain. He
Yeah.
turned into a cartoon, maniacally laughing, wisecracking supervillain. There's no difference between Matt Frewer and Robert Englund as Freddy Krueger.
Hmm.
Uh, uh,
Exactly.
right down to them both being released by New Line Cinema, I think. But there's nothing, there's no conflict there, and Job is just using Peter. Like there's no friendship between them, and he's willing to kill Peter when they first link up with Dr. Trace. And yeah, you're right. It's really odd that like a proper conflict would be about Peter trying to reach what's left of Job's heart and his kindness and how he's become twisted. There's not even like an explanation of like, oh, due to some weird complications with the computer, or perhaps giving Job steroids or something to some kind of medical treatment or virtual treatment is influencing his mind so that it goes to some kind of dark side and is an unnatural tainting of his mind. It's like, no. Intelligence made him bad. The
Yeah.
weird anti-intellectual message of this movie is don't get smart, you'll become a serial killer.
Yeah, because I think it was just like a really, I don't know, maybe they didn't even pay attention to the first movie. And I don't want people to get the wrong impression. I don't think the first movie approaches this particularly well. Again, it's just because it's actually there, that there is that question of whether or not, Job's actions are driven by his transformation, or if, he's just doing what anyone would really do if they had those powers and that freedom from consequences,
Mm.
or if he's just developed his own concept of morality because he's been, boosted so far above normal people. And this movie, to say it doesn't address those at all is actually an understatement because it's like it goes back. It regresses even beyond where the first movie's willing to go, which wasn't that far to begin with. So,
And Chad, I have a theory, which is that much like Lawnmower Man was called Cyber War or Cyber God or some damn thing, and later became married to a Stephen King short story, I think this was an unrelated script that became Lawnmower Man 2.
oh no, I totally agree. It had to have been because it just explains so much, like the stuff about the future, even though it's only 5 years ahead, and all that other stuff.
Yeah, because this is basically like the setup that you get with Peter and Friends is that it's like the Matrix for children. This feels like a pilot for Matrix Junior. It's like the Matrix on a ghostwriter budget.
It definitely does. Um, and I think you're absolutely right. It just explains too much because I mean, like, I can kind of see where Dr. Trace's role was meant for Pierce Bronson. Um, am I mispronouncing his name again?
Yes, it's Pierce Brosnan.
Yeah, I just have a mental block against getting his name right. I don't know why. Uh, anyway, yeah, but everything else is like it just doesn't fit even the first movie's mythology at all, even beyond the huge retcon. But to backtrack a little bit, I forgot my other favorite dumb moment during Job's rampage is when he tries to kill Walker, or Waller. Um, all he does is he impersonates him on a video screen and orders the guards to kill everybody on this one floor because they're terrorists.
Mhm.
And it's like the guards somehow don't recognize their own boss, and they just like take the instructions given on the video literally and just say, "Oh yeah, we should gun down this guy that looks like our boss and his assistant and the chief of security." And then they just like stand around after they do it, like, Like they don't even have any reaction to murdering their own boss.
And that's a real wasted opportunity, because like any director worth his or her salt would have cut back and shown the look on their faces just for like the comedic potential of that scene. Like
Exactly.
what do you do? Do you break for lunch at that point? Do you try to talk to Joe? Like what do you do? Like that's, I mean, technically, you know, if you were just following orders and like the cameras weren't going, you could just kind of clock out and forget about it. Like anything could have happened, and they choose to do nothing.
Yeah.
There's no edit on their reaction at all.
And adding to the subtle political commentary, of course, the entire corporate headquarters where Job is working looks like a fascist dictatorship, and all the guards go around wearing SS uniforms, essentially. So, you know,
Yeah,
take
basically.
that, take that, GOP.
Again, it's a film that cries to be remade now. Lawnmower Man 2 Beyond Cyberspace. Who knew? It's more relevant than ever. Um, like
Exactly.
it's a baffling sequel to a film that certainly didn't ask for a sequel. I mean, that's like a shock ending that the original film has. There's no intended follow-up, although you could do, like, the logical extension, I guess, would be a post-apocalyptic version of the world where Job has taken over. So then the future setting where everything's fucked up and falling apart would make sense.
Yeah.
But that's not what happens. It just goes that way anyway, and then Job becomes active independently of that. He gets back into cyberspace and becomes an evil, murderous despot of his own volition, totally unrelated to the plot of the first film. Once again, supporting my theory that this was not a Lawnmower Man script.
No.
They shoehorn it in because there's that great scene, as I mentioned, where Parker recognizes him, Parquet, because his name is Peter Parquet because he's obsessed with comic books. Subtle. But Peter recognizes Max, or recognizes Max Edward, recognizes Job because Job shows him a lawnmower. And then later on, there's the line of dialogue, "You were always just a lawnmower man." It's like, the lawnmower man is dead, as they're fighting with their swords in the very, very narrow balcony at the climax of the film.
Yeah, the signs are just so obvious, and they really could. Yeah, that's kind of the frustrating thing. Is like they could have done a movie where Job has won, and you know we're seeing the resistance to that, or it could have turned out that like the evil corporation had some technology that was keeping Job in check all along, and they still could have had like the whole thing where you know this group is acting against the corporation, but it turns out the real enemy is Job, and just sort of, you know, flipped it around. But nope, I guess they just couldn't. They just didn't have the time or the desire to really rework whatever script they went with.
Yeah, this movie is one competent rewrite away from being a logical sequel to Lawnmower Man. That's the frustrating thing.
It really is. But I guess we should. Oh yeah. We got to talk about. I think I've been mispronouncing his name this whole time. Is it Waller or Walter or Walker?
It's Walker.
Okay, this movie. I literally just watched it last night, but I think my brain is going through the process of like deleting everything related to it, including including Pierce Brosnan's name. And I think I did it again. Pierce Bronson. Pierce Bron. Blah, 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 blah. All right, whatever. Let me wrap this up before my brain melts, and I turn into Matt Fuhrer. But yeah, like even though he got shot by like 3 different guards, Walter shows up and takes Peter hostage for no reason because you know I guess because he hasn't committed any crimes technically. I mean, Job did all the evil stuff.
Yeah.
So I don't know why he's so desperate that he has to hold Peter hostage to claim the Chiron ship.
And you would have just assumed he's dead from the shootout scene anyway.
Yeah. Because at least 3 guards unloaded into him, and, you know, he just acts like he maybe fell down a flight of stairs or something. There's no bullet holes or anything. He just like shows up sweaty.
Yes, much like Werner Herzog, I guess it wasn't a significant bullet.
Exactly. And then Job saves Peter again because, he's regressed back to his normal intelligence level, therefore he's good again. And nobody brings up the fact that, he crashed a plane full of innocent people or, tried to murder Peter twice, along with everyone else.
Yeah, and it's weird because that actually skirts the one potentially interesting question this movie fails to ask, which is if you reduced the IQ, if you reduced the intelligence of someone who murdered others, and that process made them gentle and without an evil bone in their body, would they still deserve some kind of judgment or prison sentence or anything like that, or would you be able to treat them like a new person if that ultimately resulted from those memories being blocked and them no longer being a threat? And the movie's just like, no, it's fine. And the very last shot of the movie plays like something from the trailer for Simple Jack from Tropic Thunder.
I know it does. I was trying to think of a sensitive way to describe the look Peter. I mean, not the look that Peter has, but the look that Job has at the end of the movie that Matt Fewer gives him, because it's really. Are you calling him Matt Fewer
because Job has fewer brain cells?
Yeah. I don't know. I think the part of my I think the part of my brain that can handle the pronunciation of names has been affected by this movie.
You've gone full Rich Evans.
I have. Indeed. But anyway, yeah, the expression on Job's face at the end of the movie is just like I was wrestling with how to describe it, but I think you covered it for me. You threw yourself on that grenade. Thank God. Because it's just so horrible, and they're all like standing out, and they're all pointing and smiling at something, and I have no idea what it is, and it's a sunset, and like it's just it's literally the worst ending to a movie I think I've ever seen, and it's wonderful.
Yeah, it's odd because it's like they're posing for like a Sears family portrait studio photo, but it's just shot with a yellow filter, so it looks like the sun is rising, I guess, and that's it. All is forgiven, Job, and it's really bizarre. But that's one of the many joys of Lawnmower Man 2 is that it ends with the rich guy who had bad plans and was our scheming Republican who hadn't really done anything except for, cheated a guy out of his patent, but was like, he was within the law. He didn't break any rules by screwing over Dr. Trace. And he didn't hurt anybody. He just tried to, win over and potentially bribe Senator Littman. But he didn't really do anything. He didn't really do anything criminal. He just wanted to do criminal stuff and had schemes, and he had conspiracy to do so. But he didn't really do anything until the very end, where he put a gun to Job. And he's murdered, and then Job, of course, the serial killer, is our best pal.
Well, yeah, and that was the other frustrating thing is like, okay, you're not going to address what Job did, but at least have Peter have some, ambivalence about forgiving Job, and like he has to be talked into forgiving him. But no, he just switches back, say, "Oh, it's okay." He doesn't even have an "oh, it's okay" moment. He just like says, "Oh, Joe's regressing. That means he's not evil anymore." It's like, yeah. Because, I mean, it would be one thing, because, like, to me, it's worse that Job treated Peter like it's even worse than if Job tried to kill Peter directly. He just doesn't. Just sees him as collateral damage to kill Dr. Trace. He doesn't even worry about him.
Yeah, and it's totally insignificant to him, and I guess it's fine that if given above average intelligence, all Job dreams of is world conquest. But if you give him below average intelligence, he's just the sweetest guy who wants to read Cosmic Man.
and has a really inappropriate grin on his face while looking at something in the script that everybody else is pointing at.
I'm pretty sure the look on Matt Frewer's face in the final scene is because his check cleared at the moment of filming.
Yeah, because I'm sure that there was some doubt about whether or not the check would clear. But this did get released in theaters, didn't it?
Yes, it was in and out of theaters. Because I remember seeing the newspaper ad, which was Frewer in a different getup. He was in kind of a dark blue bodysuit. There was a full color ad for this in my paper. And he was in a dark blue bodysuit, and there was a virtual reality kind of machine around him, but he was gigantic, and he was extending his arms out, and there may or may not have been a tiny Earth in his hands, but he was just extending his arms out, and it said Lawnmower Man 2 Beyond Cyberspace starts Friday, but it was gone the following week. And then it was retitled, possibly to get the kind of smell of failure off of it, because anyone would recognize Beyond Cyberspace, but maybe they wouldn't recognize Job's War. Interestingly, I found out, I don't know if you saw this, there is apparently an attempt to release this simultaneously on CD-ROM. I don't know if it was meant to be a game version of the film or just a CD-ROM copy of the film.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, but judging by the quality of the film, I assumed it was only intended to be released on the Philips CDI.
Yeah. Well, that would have been awesome, though, if, the fact that the only Waterworld video game was released on the Virtual Boy, if, the only video game adaptation of Lawnmower Man 2 was released on the CDI.
It makes perfect sense.
It really does. I guess that's a good point to wrap up on is on the stories of failures, much like the story of my failure to pronounce any name correctly during this podcast. But Adam, why don't you tell the good folks at home where they can find you?
Oh, absolutely. As I mentioned at the top of the show, I'm doing a podcast on Canadian horror movies called A Part of Our Scaritage, which you can find as part of the Megaphonic network that I co-created. It's at megaphonic.fm/scare. Also, I guess the very first show that the network debuted is also a thing that I co-host, which is called It's Just a Show, which is a randomized look back on episodes of Mystery Science Theater 3000.
Excellent. And I am your host, Chad Denton. You can find me at Trash Cannon, obviously. You can also find my show, Hollywood Hates History and Before Stonewall, on YouTube. And also, please check out my new prose LGBT superhero series, John and Amar, on WordPress. And that's at johnandamar.com. All right. Thanks for being on, Adam. And we will join you all beyond cyberspace next time. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.